Hello, all. Oi. Hello. How are you, gents? Drew, hello. How are you, mate?
I said, I got the jacket today. A bit of short straw with the jacket.
I went for a walk through some wetlands with Sam O'Connor yesterday afternoon, and it was humid. It was humid. Testing 1, 2, David Crisafulli, Jared Blay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Today, a record that no Queenslander wants to see, 2,133 cars stolen for the month of December. That is the highest December ever on record. It's an increase of nearly 50% from the year before. Behind every one of these cars will be a story of thousands of victims. Every car, every family relies on it, so there are many, many Queenslanders impacted. But I want to tell you the story about Emma. Emma from Townsville had her vehicle stolen on the 3rd of December. Offenders broke into her home, they stole the handbag, took everything they could grab and got off in her car. Emma's the mum of 3. She has one on the way. Her youngest is 8 months old. Her car was insured, but because she had it under finance, the insurance payer doesn't allow her to get a new vehicle. She now has to juggle 3 kids with one on the way, a husband who works, one vehicle. She's having to take him to and from, rely on friends, rely on Uber, because her capacity to replace that car is nil. And her story will be replicated across the state. Amongst that 2,133 will be young tradies who go out to jump in their vehicle and go and earn a living, and it's not there, and it can't be replaced instantly. So therefore, they have loss of revenue. Within that 2,133 will be Queenslanders who won't be able to have their insurance payout for weeks, for months, and that means that they have to pay over and above their costs to be able to do what they should be able to do every day of the year. And amongst that 2,133 will be a whole heap of Queenslanders whose insurance premiums will rise drastically, plus the excess they pay because a government can't manage youth crime in this state. It's that simple. There are consequences for governments that can't manage service delivery, and that hits you in the hip pocket every day. I hope the Premier takes the time to listen to the Queenslanders that I am listening to, because they will tell her enough is enough. And the Premier may wish to try and continue to stonewall our calls and the calls of Queenslanders to get back to work and recall Parliament early, but these figures show how broken the system is. Today there are meetings of Queenslanders who want us to take action on youth justice. They want us to do more up front, to be compassionate and turn young people's lives around early. And there are Queenslanders who want us to do more to make sure that the hardcore repeat offenders know that there should be consequences for actions at the other end of the scale. That the government is failing young kids and Queensland working families, and it's failing it at both ends of the spectrum. And the Premier cannot continue to stonewall and refuse to listen when figures like this are on the table. 2,133 cars stolen, thousands of Queenslanders' lives impacted, an increase of nearly 50% in a year. Surely that's enough for a government to start listening. Over to you, Jared.
Well, thank you, David, and good morning. Jared Blay, Deputy Leader of the Opposition. Well, we're entering the 9th year of the Palaszczuk government, and I've got to say it is an absolute shocker. It is a shocker start to the 9th year of the Palaszczuk government. I want to run through some of the things that have only happened in the last 5 to 6 weeks since the Premier's returned from her overseas travel in France. So the Premier spent 5 weeks drinking Chandon in Paris. She came back, and Queenslanders have seen all but their Premier twice. So the Premier's not getting up every day dealing with the issues of the youth crime crisis, the housing crisis, the homelessness issue, the Olympic issue with funding with the federal government. No, barely seen her twice since she's been back from overseas. So rather than a Premier taking the lead and coming back from overseas and saying to her backbench and her colleagues, I'm ready to fight the good fight in 2023, we're seeing the same of this Premier Palaszczuk, and that is very little of her. Maybe there's a reason for that. Maybe the Labor Party don't want the Premier out and about. Youth crime. Serious repeat offenders have gone up from 10% to 17%. Every Queenslander you talk to will talk about the youth crime crisis. Only a few days ago in my electorate, we had an urgent crime summit called in the heart of my community. People living in fear. 5 homes broken into, Australia Day and the 27th. And the community are calling for the laws to change, consequences for action, early intervention. There's another crime forum in my electorate going to be held this Sunday. This is serious, and the Premier's not acting. Who can forget the Deputy Premier standing up and saying, Cabinet's been working on these 10-point plan for many months, and the Premier at her first press conference since getting back from Paris saying, Cabinet haven't approved the plan. We're consulting. Well, why didn't they consult over the Christmas period? Because I tell you this, Premier, criminals didn't take a holiday at Christmas, but it appears you did and your ministers did. And unfortunately, Queenslanders are paying the price for that, with their homes being broken into and their cars being stolen. Housing. Social housing, now again, the worst in the nation. Over 100 days since the Housing Summit was held, and it turns out again, it's a talk fest. What action has the Deputy Premier taken in the housing crisis? How many homes can they say they have moved families into under their plan? None. Labor member Jim Madden, under investigation for bullying. We've found that out in the last week and a half. The health crisis, overseen by Yvette D'Arth, the Health Minister, who should not be the Health Minister. She should have resigned months ago. If she hadn't have resigned, she should have been sacked by Anastasia. Though we know Anastasia is checked out, she's too weak to deal with these issues, and she will keep her lame duck Health Minister Yvette D'Arth in the job. But Queenslanders have lost confidence in Yvette D'Arth, and the Queensland Health frontline workers have lost confidence in the Health Minister to be able to fix the issues of the health crisis. We've seen maternity wards close. We've seen the government do what they always do in the last week, try and fix up a political issue in the public domain by saying, oh, there's a doctor going there to Gladstone, there's a doctor going to Mackay and so forth. It's not washing with Queenslanders anymore, Palaszczuk. The same tricks you've used for the last 8.5 years, nearly 9 years now, are not working. Queenslanders can see through it. Queenslanders can see your government has run out of ideas. The Labor state government have run out of ideas. We're seeing the CCC in the last 48 hours release an undue influence report, and they've talked about lobbyists. They've talked about how unions should be held under the banner of lobbyists. Now, you remember when the CCC handed down a report a few years ago when they talked about banning developer donations to local councillors. Well, Premier Palaszczuk, with the high moral ground, got up and said, not only are we going to ban developer donations for local councils, we're going to ban them for developers donating to state MPs as well. So she embraced the Crime and Corruption Commission. She has embraced all the reports of the Crime and Corruption Commission. She said at every report she's going to act on the issues. And then yesterday, the Deputy Premier stood up and was asked about the undue influence of the union movement in Queensland on the Labor government. He said, no, I don't think there's actually an undue influence of unions on the Labor government. Despite the CCC saying there was, despite the CCC recommending changes that unions should be under declared lobbyists because of undue influencing practices. The CCC would not have said that in their report had they have not received evidence or submissions when they did their investigation and undue influence report. They've obviously received something in the CCC, but again, the Labor Party just dismiss it. Oh no, we don't believe in that because we are funded by the union movement. That's the issue for the Labor Party. Olympic infrastructure. Today, the federal government, the state government, have not agreed to a 50-50 funding split. Seriously, the Olympic funding, I'm telling you today, is in doubt. Olympic infrastructure is in doubt. The Gabba redevelopment, the Sunshine Coast heavy passenger rail, it is in doubt because the federal government and the state Labor government have not got their act together and got in a room and sorted it out and agreed to 50-50 funding split. Cost of living crisis, energy prices going up today, gas prices going up today in Queensland. What has the government been doing about that? And let me get now to the Palaszczuk patient tax. This greedy, great big new tax the Palaszczuk government is introducing on our GP clinics across Queensland. And who do you think will pay for this? Well, the Treasurer has no idea, because yesterday he again attacked our doctors and said, no, they've been paying this, but we stopped it during COVID. That is a lie. This payroll tax did not apply in those circumstances they would have you believe before COVID. It is a new interpretation, therefore it is a new Palaszczuk patient tax. Cameron Dick in 2020, when Palaszczuk was elected, said, and I quote, "This government will not introduce any new taxes or increase taxes." And what have we seen since then? The renters tax Cameron Dick and Palaszczuk tried to put on Queenslanders, they've abandoned that. And now we see the Palaszczuk patients tax. And now Cameron Dick today is fighting journalists, saying, oh, that's not what I said. It is what he said. He clearly said that it is an interpretation that stopped during COVID and now they're just doing it again. It is not the case. I stood up with the Leader of the Opposition, with Jen, at Saltwater Medical Centre in Caloundra only a few days ago, with 15 local GPs and practice owners behind us. I would say to Cameron Dick and Stephen Miles and Palaszczuk, go and talk to those 15 or so people. Go and say to Jen, we're only redoing what we did in COVID. And they'll tell Cameron Dick the truth. They'll tell him where to go, because he is a liar. He is lying about this. They were not paying this interpretation of payroll tax before COVID. It is sneaky, it is tricky, and it is Cameron Dick. It is the equivalent of the Sheriff of Nottingham. Cameron Dick is the Sheriff of Nottingham in Queensland. And he is trying to pull a lid over Queenslanders' eyes. But Queenslanders know, GPs know. This tax is going to be passed on to the patient. Patients will be paying it. And we are in a cost of living crisis. We can't have patients deciding not to send their children to doctors because of the increased costs. We have sick children in Queensland. We have sick people that need to see their GPs. It has to be as less expensive as possible, as inexpensive as possible. And this Treasurer is doing everything he can to make the health crisis even worse, because that's what's going to happen. GPs will put up their costs to deal with the Palaszczuk patient tax, and patients will go to the emergency departments, already crumbling our already sick health system. Can I just say, in conclusion, as I started, this is the 9th year, and to cap it all off, to cap all this off, tomorrow the Liberal National Party will be taking our team, the opposition, to Redcliffe, in the heart of the health crisis, where Yvette Darth is the health minister and the local member. We're going to be talking to locals. We're going to be talking to locals impacted by crime. We're going to be talking to locals impacted by the cost of living crisis, the health crisis. We're going to be talking to patients impacted because of Yvette Darth as the health minister. And we're going to be talking to businesses about their costs, the costs of doing business. We're going to be talking to GPs in Redcliffe. Contrast that to the Palaszczuk government. They're going to Fraser Island. So while we're talking to patients in Redcliffe, Palaszczuk will be drinking mojitos with her team on a luxury island, in a luxury resort. Now, don't get me wrong. Fraser Island is a great place. I've been there many a times. Queenslanders love Fraser Island. International tourists love Fraser Island. And I'd encourage everyone to go to Fraser Island. But at this point in the election cycle, at this point at the start of the year, after the Premier's just got back from 5 weeks in Paris, to then take your team to Fraser Island is inappropriate. Her team should be on the ground, in our communities, talking to people about the new patients tax, talking about the health crisis, the housing crisis, the youth crime crisis. They're the issues that matter. But instead, we've got a Premier and a government that have checked out, but will be checking in to a luxury resort at Fraser Island. It's inappropriate. That'll do me.
Sorry for the long preamble, but it's a big list. Right.
Go back a few issues. They've obviously said a very pleasing national forecast. You spoke about how the impact on that last year.
As we did with their last point plan, after the tragedy on Boxing Day, where 2 innocent Queenslanders and an unborn child lost their life in the Redlands, we'll always be sober as an opposition and look at reforms and make suggestions, but I'm not going to stand in the way of reforms. What I will do, though, is ask the Premier to have the same level of maturity. And unless you have consequences for actions in the Youth Justice Act, and unless you have breach of bail as an offence, other offences just won't do what they're supposed to do. We're asking police to do a job with one hand tied behind their back. They already have less numbers than 2 years ago, and they have weaker laws than 8 years ago. Is it any wonder why youth crime is out of control? So, look, we won't stand in the way of changes to a Youth Justice Act. It'd be great if the government had the same level of maturity, and many of the reforms will fall well short until a broken Youth Justice Act that was broken in 2015 is repaired. Oh, no doubt, but the majority of car thefts are young offenders, and that's deeply troubling. And it's troubling for anyone who also believes in the power of early intervention, of trying to get in and turn a young person's life around. But we're also seeing kids with 80-plus offences who've never been charged, who've never spent 1 day of having consequences for their behaviour. So it's a broken system at both ends, and until it's fixed, nothing will change. And the Premier can say that it's fit and proper for us to wait until the end of February to deal with this, but that's not what Queenslanders are saying. Queenslanders know that the government made a deliberate decision to water down the Act, and they are living through it. And 2,133, that's just the number of vehicles. Think of the number of Queenslanders that impacts. That just permeates throughout a community. The system is broken, and it was broken by the government. And for the Premier not to recall Parliament suggests that she knows that where the blame for this lies. And Queenslanders have worked it out as well. And they're reaching out in record numbers, and they want action. And until the Youth Justice Act has consequences for actions embedded as the first principle, and that you're able to actually be held accountable for bail conditions that are set, nothing will change. And that's soul-destroying for a couple of thousand Queenslanders who have had their lives torn upside down. Sorry. Look, I'm always loath to comment on individual sentences. I always have been, and what I'm also loath to do is make this solely an issue about courts. The Premier sought to do that under pressure, and I'm not going to do it. Now, there are times that decisions leave Queenslanders shaking their head, but the best way to do that is to fix the legislation that allows innocent Queenslanders not to be given the justice they deserve. And that's something where we should all work on. And to suggest that the watering down of many of the laws wasn't going to have an impact was fanciful. And the government was warned at the time. And compounding that is the fact that in the last 2 years, we have 12 fewer police. Now, those figures are a bit old. I'm troubled that it may actually have deteriorated further. And that's troubling. Think about the population increase in Queensland, think about the crime escalation, and the gift that we've given men and women in blue uniforms is to have less of them on the street and to give them weaker laws. And then the Premier throws up her hands when innocent Queenslanders' lives are being torn apart. Well, there's only one place where the blame lays, and it's at the feet of the state government. And something has got to change, and it should change today. Thanks, guys. Thanks very much.
Cheers. See ya.
Did you want him to do that again? Or?
Oh, yeah, ban.